the fact that the rates of air pollution in Indian cities are among the highest in the world, the fact that most of our major rivers are dead, the fact that because of very short-sighted populist agricultural policies, there is a massive depletion of groundwater aquifers across India, the fact that there are serious problems with the disposal of chemical waste and nuclear waste. Since I am speaking in Canada, I should mention that too. There are manifold kinds of environmental problems in India which adversely affect the health, the livelihood, the subsistence, the survival of hundreds of millions of Indians, and at a daily ongoing level, and threaten, certainly imperil, the prospects for sustainable economic growth in India. And I think that is what Indians should be concerned about, not really much more than climate change. They should be concerned about the state of India's domestic environment, whether it be water, forests, biodiversity, toxic waste, soil condition, and so on and so forth. Now, as I understand it, extreme inequalities and rapid environmental degradation are problems or challenges the market really can't handle. Now, I think I have already made it clear that I am not a socialist. I think that the market is very important in India for creating jobs, for generating wealth, for unleashing a wave of innovation and dynamism, which it can and must do. But an unchecked market will perpetuate extreme inequalities, and it's perfectly rational for the capitalists to pollute the environment too. So I don't think the market really has a long-term solution for sustainable, rational environmental management. So clearly there are other actors that have to come in to moderate excessive inequality and to promote or to nudge the society and the state towards more sustainable environmental policies. Who are these actors? The state, citizens groups, and the media. And the Indian media, which historically played a very important and crucial role in nurturing a sense of Indian nationalism, in furthering the ideals of Indian democracy, has played a somewhat less than optimum role here. You know, I must be the only columnist in the Indian media who has mentioned that house in Mumbai. With one partial exception, I remember a television program where a heritage architect or an architect with a professed interest in heritage came on the show and said that this would add to the heritage value of the Mumbai skyline. So there are exceptions. I mean, one very brave and pioneering Indian journalist is a man called P. Sainath, who writes for the Hindu newspaper and for many years has written extensively and sensitively on rural deprivation and agrarian distress. But on the whole, the Indian media is completely complicit in this worship of wealth, celebrity, and superstardom. It's also something I am perhaps more distressed about because of my own past work in the environmental field. It's also abandoned its commitment to serious environmental reportage. The Indian environmental movement started in the early 1970s, and unlike in the West, it was not a middle class movement. It was not people concerned about disappearing fish species or declining redwood stocks. It was a movement of peasants concerned about subsistence and survival issues. And these concerns of peasants and tribals seeking to protect their forests and their fish resources and their water and so on were articulated and theorized by a group of journalists. Preeminent among them was a remarkable man who lived much of his life in Delhi, called Anil Agarwal, who founded the State of India, who founded the Center for Science and Environment, which started publishing in the early 1980s the state citizens' reports on India's environment. And you know, his model was completely taken over, you know, in a pre-intellectual property right regime by the World Watch Institute in Washington. We started publishing the State of the World reports with exactly modeled on Agarwal's scheme. You know, so you had chapters on the state of forest, state of water, state of pollution, and so on. And Agarwal drew on the work of many other committed Indian journalists. I mean, they were, you know, the Bhopal gas tragedy of 1984 was really brought to wider attention by a quite remarkable journalist writing in Hindi called Rajkumar Keswani. the decline of biodiversity in the Western Ghats was brought to wider attention by a journalist writing in Kannada called Nagesh Hegde. So, India had a very honorable and distinguished tradition of environmental journalists writing in the 70s and 80s, who documented very sympathetically, sensitively and rigorously the impact of unchecked industrialization and economic development on natural resources and the impact this was having, the negative impact this was having on the livelihood of peasant and tribal communities. And I may say so that the field of environmental social science in India, I spent nearly 20 years working on environmental sociology and history, and had it not been for these journalists, neither me nor other sociologists and historians and economists would have really focused attention on environmental questions. That tradition has disappeared. Unfortunately, economic thinking in India worked from one extreme to the other. So, state control of the economy was too rigorous, too excessive, and then we moved to a free market regime which has spawned a new kind of press where the newspapers who had environmental journalists on their rolls have either laid them off or redesignated them as stock market correspondents. So, the Indian press has played a less than honorable role in both moderating inequality and in focusing attention on rampant environmental degradation. Another challenge that the Republic of India faces today is political fragmentation. Now, part of this is a response to India's diversity. India is too large, too complex, too variegated, ever to be run by a single party or even by a stable two-party system. So, you have a proliferation of parties seeking to represent suppressed voices, low castes, minority linguistic groups, regions, far-flung regions, backward regions and so on. So, you have a multiplicity of parties. But this democratic upsurge has had less than rational effects when it comes to policy making. So, for example, when a national government has to be formed in Delhi, no single party can come anywhere near a majority. So, to rule, the Congress party needs the support of 8 or 10 smaller parties. And as a price of support, those smaller parties ask for the most profitable ministries. So, multi-party coalitions in India are a constraint against rational, far-sighted policy making, but they are also an incentive to rent-seeking and corruption. The penultimate problem facing the Republic of India today are what I call the unreconciled borderlands. In my book, India After Gandhi, I say that India is about 50% democratic and 80% united. I've talked about the 50% democratic so far. I mean, I've talked about the decline of public institutions, the conversion of political parties into family firms, the tendency to use violent means by radicals of left and right and so on. But let me talk about 80% united. 80% is actually quite staggering. I mean, when India was born and through the 50s and 60s, no one expected India to hold together as a single nation, because of this extraordinary diversity. It was confidently predicted it would break up into 8 or 10 or 15 parts. But there some threats remain. India is a union of 28 states. The citizens of 25 states are more or less reconciled to being Indian, and in some ways more than reconciled, are happy to affirm themselves as Indian. Because of this promotion of linguistic and religious diversity, they are quite comfortable with being Indian. But 3 states are unreconciled. One is Kashmir, or one part of Kashmir, the valley of Kashmir, which is only one part of Kashmir, which is a disputed territory over which India and Pakistan have fought 3 wars, and where the citizens are deeply discontented because of many complicated reasons, one of which is repression by the Indian state. Then you have the Kashmir problem is well known and well covered all over the world, partly because India and Pakistan both have nuclear arms. But then in the northeast, you have two less known insurgencies in Nagaland and Manipur, where again, if a referendum was to be taken, probably a majority of the citizens of those 2 admittedly small states would want a separate homeland. So, you have the unreconciled borderlands.